last celebration of the 150th anniversary of the library, it seems appropriate to start pretty much on time for Cornwall. I've always found that Cornwall tends to show up almost exactly on time, and it looks like we've had a larger turnout than any of us expected. So thank you all for coming today. This has been a very active year for the library, and I want to thank all of you who have been so generously contributing to the 150th anniversary appeal. As you know, the proceeds of that appeal are dedicated to improving the facilities, services, and programs of the library. None of the proceeds will be used for recurring operations. Your board is hard at work on the proposed refurbishments at the moment, and we expect that you will begin to see the results early next year. And incidentally, all donations to the jar today will also go towards that appeal. I would like to thank all the friends and board members of the library for making this event happen, but particularly Carla Herman, who's been the quarterback on this. Carla, where are you? Anne Coffin. Eileen Garvin, and of course our wonderful library director, Margaret Hask. Now, as you know, there's a tradition of singing for your supper, but this time, on this occasion, you're just going to sit here and hear some good readings. But then we are going to have a party over at the library. One of the features of the party will be that there will be a silent auction of collections of books by some of the authors who are going to be read from tonight. So I hope you'll all come over there for that. There'll be lots of homemade food and drinks, and hopefully no evidence of any turkey whatsoever. I will now briefly introduce today's readers. You can read about more of them and some of their accomplishments in the program. And I hope you all got programs. I understand that we ran out. So if couples could share a program, perhaps give surplus programs to people who haven't got one, that would be great. But presumably by now you've already figured out that this, from the title of today's event, that all of our readers live in Cornwall. And all the books which are being read by authors who also live in Cornwall. Lewis Gannett's Cream Hill was for many years effectively a required reading when you arrived at Cornwall. I remember someone gave me a copy 17 years ago when I came. Selections will be read by author Alex Prudhomme. The words of serious foodie and novelist Laurie Colwyn will be read by our actress neighbour Blair Brown. A selection from the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Paul Van will be read by his great-nephew, I hope I got that right, Adam Van Doren, himself an artist and an author. Letters from our town's Civil War hero, Major General John Sedgwick, will be read by Dean Zaccardi. As most of you know, I suspect, he's fresh from a triumph last night when he and his friend Mary brought the house down at the Town Hall talent show with a rendering of Sonny and Cher's I Got You Babe. We're really lucky we might do that again today. And lastly, what could be more appropriate than a selection from the hilarious writing of the beloved New Yorker writer, cartoonist James Thurber, read by our own prize-winning novelist Roxana Robinson. Books by these authors and by today's readers are of course available on the library. And with that, I'd like you to join me in thanking today's readers and all the people who put so much effort into making this happen, and welcome Alex Prudhomme. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon, Carla, Anne, and all of you for supporting Cornwall and its library, a community hub rivaled in popularity only by Cream Hill Lake and the transfer station. It is a joy to be here on Thanksgiving, one of my favorite times of year. I'll be reading from Lewis Gannett, who was a bard of Cornwall and took careful note of the change in seasons. Now, for those of you who don't remember or never knew, Lewis Gannett was a long-term, part-time resident of Cornwall who shared a remarkable house on Cream Hill with his wife, the artist Ruth Gannett, whose simple and elegant illustration graces your program and the cover of this book. Lewis was the book reviewer of the New York Herald, where his column Books and Things ran from 1930 to 1956. A reviewer of books has a box seat at the theater of history, he said, and it has been an exciting seat. Gannett reviewed 8,000 books in 6,000 columns, and in 1939 was named America's Best Book Reviewer by the American Book Congress. An admiring colleague wrote, "Louis Gannett, who was interested in ships and shoes, and though to a lesser degree sealing wax, takes a livelier interest in a greater number of things than almost any other man in town." Now, books and things often skewed heavily towards the things. Gannett's 1949 review of Thomas Merton's Waters of Silo, for instance, began with a description of how fireflies flickered like night stars reflected in a wind-blown lake, segued into the various phenomena he encountered on vacation, presumably here in Cornwall, including owls, tree frogs, katydids, a fox, and a local newspaper distributor, before meandering back to Merton in the third-to-last paragraph. Speaking of Cornwall, Gannett wrote a book called Cream Hill. Reviewing it in the New York Times, Charles Poore wrote, "Hark, the Herald Tribune sings, with Louis Gannett's books and things. Now let the Tribune Heralds yell, Gannett's book, Cream Hill, is swell." So here are a few short excerpts published in 1949, which evoke a land at once intimately familiar to us and now disappeared. This is a chapter called Cream Hill Calendar. January. Until 1946, when our town with state aid rebuilt the Cream Hill Road as an all-season highway, ours was a hazardous road at any time of year and an all but impassable road from New Year's until well into June. The snow sometimes drifted 10 or 15 feet high at the top of the hill, and when the drifts melted in the spring, the resultant freshet ran off half the road with it, leaving a series of awesome canyons and some of the muddiest mud through which I have ever waded. Cop O'Donnell, long our town's first selectman, believed that all that was necessary to restore a road like ours was to scoop up the silt from the gutters and redeposit it atop the road. Such loose silt naturally washed out in the next heavy thunderstorm, leaving the road a mess again. Our road was good only for a brief season of midsummer drought. I have in my files a letter from Cop dated June 17th, 1931, in which he cheerfully assured me that the weather controls your road. Roads are very wet at present. I think you'd better not try to get home at present. March. March is the desperate, disillusioning month of the year. The calendar says that spring begins in March, but most of the time the calendar lies. In New York City, the March air may breathe of spring, but on Cream Hill, winter still reigns. For most of the month, the snow still lies deep, and though Lawrence Stevens sets his sap buckets on the maples that line the road on the south side of Cream Hill, through most of March they freeze every night. Sub-zero temperatures are still common, but if there's disappointment, there is also promise. The streams are no longer icebound and still. Midday thaws swell them, and the nights are no longer silent. The first spring song is the sound of running water. May. In our Cream Hill calendar, the year has two great months, October and May, and the greatest of these is May. The only trouble with May is that there is not enough of it. May is always too short. The world changes too fast. There are not enough days in the months, not enough hours in the day, or minutes in the hour. Neither enough for the ecstasy of the May woods and roadsides, nor enough for the back-breaking toil which May demands in the garden. The grass needs raking. It is time to lift the leaves from the garden beds and to dig in the manure scattered in November. The vegetable gardens need spading, and even winter wood chopping does not maintain a city man's back in condition for steady spading. The fruit trees should be sprayed. If that new patch of lawn where the old road ran is ever to be leveled, this is the time to do it. Spading the garden, one meets worms. Reminder that the fishing season is open again. Every minute, a mysterious warbler's song demands investigation. At no other time of year is woods walking more rewarding. The city man in the country on a May morning is like a child on Christmas Day. Bewildered by the distracting abundance, he doesn't know where to begin. The sudden richness of life is frustrating. He almost wants to cry. July and August. July and August are the dog days, the hot months, the season of summer people and visiting relatives. Cars hoot up and down the highway. Airplanes peer down at us. Our solitude is gone. The birds understand the seasons better than men. They know that these are the dead months of the year. They stop singing. They skulk away to molt and lose the tropical gaiety of the plumage in which they arrived in triumphant spring. By mid-August, the swallows have vanished from the farmers' big barns and are perching in immense flocks on the telephone wires in the valley, preparing for their long southern trek. Swallows are the most gregarious of birds, but one year, an over-industrious family started a belated second or third brood in Mark Van Doren's barn, so late that in mid-September, when the great flocks had disappeared, that pair was still feeding its young. One swallow family must have made the long journey to South America in unaccustomed loneliness. When the pump works, as it sometimes does, we rush to the house. We rush to the hoses, 3 of them. While water pours into the attic tank, we water furiously, but never enough. There isn't enough water in all Cream Hill Lake to quench our gardens in a dry year. So we give it up and go swimming and return with appetites for a dozen ears of corn. November, where we find ourselves now. In November, the earth waits. Summer has gone. Autumn has passed. Winter is not yet here. The season seems uncertain of itself. It is a good chore time. We rake the leaves again. In industrious years, we cover some of our more precious plants with salt hay. We bank the house. I put away the screen doors. With the grass brown and the trees bare, the rains sink into the earth and the hill spring flows again. I drain the bulky pump and motor at the maple spring. I finish stacking the wood in the cellar and begin to plan the winter's cutting, and I fell a few sizable trees for working up in snow time. When we pull up the bean and squash vines and the cabbage and chard stumps, add them to the mulch pile in the corner of the vegetable garden, and store the root crops in the cellar. I cajole neighboring farmers for a load of manure. Usually they begrudge me their time more than their manure. We put away the porch furniture. The house ceases to be a part of the outdoors world. It becomes a refuge against dark and cold. Fewer cars roar up and down the road. Cream Hill, once more, is a world of its own, apart. When the earth rests, man wants to rest too. It becomes possible once more to read on Cream Hill. My daily task has for 20 years been reading and reviewing books, and friends often ask why I cannot spend more than weekends in the country doing my work there. But from March until November, I find it all but impossible to read in the country. All outdoors seems to be shrieking for me to come out and share its excitements. I hear birds singing. My mind wanders off to 1,000 beckoning chores and discoveries. To sit indoors and read a book in the country daylight is a prison chore. Moreover, I find I read more slowly. The country has relaxed me. So I keep my Cream Hill weekends clean for Cream Hill chores and pleasures, and pack work night and day into as brief a city week as I can devise. But in November, the days are short and chill. I rediscover the pleasure of sitting by a fire and reading. December. Of all the months in the year, December is the most unpredictable. If we remember, we pack snow boots, ski pants, and a snow shovel in the car when the calendar spells 12th month. But when November is mild, we forget what sudden changes December may have in store. The year our town doctor celebrated his 50th birthday, about December 1st, we came up from a rain-soaked New York to find the snow 15 inches deep on the level and the Cream Hill Road unplowed. We spent the night in the village and slogged, wet-ankled, through the snow in the morning. But the first year we spent Christmas on Cream Hill, when Ruthie and Michael came eagerly laden with snowshoes, skates, and skis, pansies bloomed in the rock garden, and the grass was green. By December, most of the straggling summer folks have passed their last shivering weekends and remain warmly in the city. This is the season when we come to know our neighbors and to feel a part of our country community. The fires inside seem to warm the faces that come out of the houses. Greetings are a little warmer than in midsummer. At the very time of year when we spend most hours snugly with indoors, we feel most a part of Cream Hill. We become freshly aware of neighbors of all kinds. Tracks in the snow tell us of fellow Cream Hillers of whom all summer we had no awareness. In summer, one becomes dull to the abundance of bird song. But in December, the mere twitter of a single chickadee, the hammer of a woodpecker, the chirp of a tree sparrow in the barnyard is an experience. And a flock of grosbeaks or siskins, visitors from the north, is excitement. We put out birdseed. At night, we listen to the barred owl with a sense of companionship. We plan Christmas. Despite its frostiness, December is the friendliest month of the year. Thanks.
Lori was my neighbor in New York long before I ever heard of Cornwall. I fell in love with her novels, but then I really fell in love with the collection of essays, articles from Gourmet that she wrote about food, friends, family, sometimes with recipes. For those of you who are cooks, they're very, very interesting to read. So I recommend that for winter months. This is from Home Cooking, A Writer in the Kitchen, 1988. It was published. It's from two pieces, one called Dinner Parties and another called Feeding the Fussy. It is a fact of life that people give dinner parties, and when they invite you, you have to turn around and invite them back. Often they retaliate by inviting you again, and you must extend then another invitation. Back and forth you go like ping-pong balls, and what you end up with is called social life. Of course, one person's dinner party is another's potluck. Glossy photos in magazines of women wearing $8,000 dresses, lighting huge numbers of candles in huge numbers of Georgian silver candlesticks on a table that seats 40 can be pretty depressing when all you have is a ratty sweater and an old dishwasher. In the photos, liveried footmen hover in the background, hiding a battalion of cleaners. To the average person, the dishwasher stands in for any number of servants. Of course, some people actually have a servant who takes away the plates after each course and then brings new clean ones. In other households, this person is often called a husband. In the old days, women planned dinner parties by sitting down with the cook and discussing what might be nice to serve. The cook or the servant did the shopping. The table was set by the scullery maid. The hostess's job was to dress well and smile, and the husband poured the wine. Nowadays, almost everyone everyone works, and the hostess usually spends a few days on and off consulting with the cook, a replica of the hostess, at about 2 o'clock in the morning when she can't sleep. The cook servant, another twin to the hostess, does the shopping on the way to or on the way home from work. And the butler, a double of the husband, buys the wine and some flowers. The cook and butler rush home, set the table, start the meal, and just as they collapse, exhausted in their chairs with a glass of wine, the guests arrive. Some people like to feed lots of people at a time. Often this pays back several invitations at once. Others like to mix and match their friends. I know a couple who keep a kind of dinner party log. Who came, who was matched with whom, and what was served. But what to feed them? The idea of a dinner party is rather like the idea of a novel. People who have never written novels say, oh, but they're so long and they have so many chapters. Many people feel just the same way about dinner parties. They're so long and they have so many courses. Just as novels are written chapter by chapter, so are dinner parties put together course by course. And just as novels are not necessarily written from beginning to middle to end, although they generally end up that way, it is easier to think about a dinner party course by course, but not consecutively. The easiest thing to think about is salad. Salad, of course, is a course by itself and requires almost nothing. A bunch of watercress, a few scallions is all it takes, plus olive oil, salt, pepper, and vinegar or lemon juice. A dressing can be mixed beforehand. This takes about 5 seconds. Or the salad can be dressed at the table, which also takes about 5 seconds. Bread and cheese are often served with the salad course, both of which can be bought. This requires nothing more of the cook than some cash and a trip to a good cheese store. Dessert can also be bought if you're exhausted and not inclined to dessert making. But to some, dessert is the fun part, both in the cooking and the eating. Millions of delicious things can be made in advance. All right, this takes care of 2 whole courses, leaving a main course, a first course, and hors d'oeuvres. Because I am always hungry, I eschew hors d'oeuvres. When they come my way, I eat too many and then I'm full by the time I reach the table. Hors d'oeuvres were invented to be eaten with drinks a long time before a meal. Now, some diehards feel that to give a dinner party without a starter is barbaric. Elder types want to get right down to the good stuff and not mess around with some funny little thing on a very small plate. Some hosts and hostesses are too tired to worry about a first and a second course and wish that they had called the whole thing off. A first course can always be bought, of course. For example, smoked salmon or sliced tomatoes, sliced cucumbers with a spicy dressing are extremely simple and cost next to nothing. This leaves the main course to worry about. In the old days, it was just the other way around. Everyone knew what to serve for dinner. Leg of lamb. It was all those other things that complicated a meal. Leg of lamb, beloved by hostesses of previous generations, is one of the easiest things to render inedible. Often leathery slices of gray cardboard or quivering pieces of red matting, the texture of wet socks, were offered to dinner guests. Lamb must be pink. But it is hard to get a leg of lamb right, and it is relieving to see that it has gone out of fashion. Also out of fashion, like the boxer dog and the poodle skirt, is roast beef, since people who will eat an entire strawberry shortcake feel funny about red meat and fat, or feel they cannot buy standing rib for 6 and have anything left over for, say, school tuition or dry cleaners. Most people are idiosyncratic about food. The restrictions, fads, diets, notions, and phobias people have about food are truly endless, to say nothing of serious religious conviction. Every host and hostess has the same nightmare. A dinner party has been planned for 6, of whom 2 are kosher. A menu has been planned around that fact. Cold fish in green sauce, vegetarian lasagna, a salad, and a pear tart. At the last minute, it develops that of the other 4 guests, 1 is on a strict wheat-free diet, another cannot eat dairy products, and another is allergic to fish. An easy solution to this problem is to change friends instantly. Find some red-blooded chowhounds with few scruples and no interest in health. Another approach is to take a preventive line, send out a questionnaire, or some subject potential guests to ruthless cross-examination. Some people have been taught that it is impolite to turn anything down. And if you ask them, they say, "Oh, I eat everything." Then, as you are slicing the steak, they shyly tell you that they have not eaten red meat in 10 years. It is also wise to know if people are fatally allergic to something. You do not want to be responsible for the death of your guests, but it sometimes seems that they will be the death of you. Vegetarians, for example, are enough to drive anyone crazy. Like Protestants, they come in a number of denominations. Lacto-vegetarians will eat dairy, eggs, and usually fish, but some lacto-vegetarians will not eat fish. Vegans will not eat dairy products or fish or eggs. And some people say that they are vegetarians when they mean they do not eat red meat, leading you to realize that for some people, chicken is a vegetable. Potential hosts and hostesses can learn much as guests in the homes of others. From the position of invited victim, I have learned that it is unwise to produce an exotic meal, especially one you have never made before. I remember with a dread clarity a dinner party with a very long drinks period. When every scrap of cheese, olive, and stick of celery had been devoured, we were called ravenous to the table. Once we were seated, the hostess appeared bearing a large pumpkin. This puzzled us all. "What's that?" said a rude guest. "It's an Argentine dish," our friend said cheerfully. At those words, I felt a little snake of unhappy anticipation crawl up my neck. From the bowels of this pumpkin came forth a strange substance that was neither soup nor stew, and contained overcooked meat and undercooked eggplant. I wondered how this had been done, and realized that the meat and eggplant had probably been cooked separately. We sat at an enormous table and drank a vast quantity of very expensive wine. For several years, I caused my friends to be intimate with one of two meals: chili, potato salad, shortbread, and ice cream for dessert. Or baked mustard chicken, potato salad, creamed spinach with jalapeno peppers, shortbread, and ice cream for dessert. After you have cooked your dinner party 6 or 7 times, you will be able to do it in your sleep, but your friends will be bored. You will then have to go in search of new friends who have never had creamed spinach with jalapeno peppers. Or you will have to find something new to feed your old friends. In either case, you will be helping to keep the wheels of society spinning in an effortless and graceful way. And no one will ever really know how antisocial you really are.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My great uncle Carl Van Doren spent many years in Cornwall, moving here over 100 years ago, but he was originally from the Midwest. He and his brother, my grandfather Mark, grew up on a farm in central Illinois. The village he grew up in was called Hope. It was one of 3 villages at one time: Hope, Faith, and Charity. But Faith and Charity have long disappeared. He was, I would also say that his grandparents founded the church that still survives today. I've been there a couple of times over spans of 25-year intervals. The town hasn't changed at all, which is kind of remarkable. It's still just 12 houses. Carl, he was one of 5 brothers, Carl was, and they all went to the University of Illinois. But 2 of them, Carl and Mark, came to New York to pursue literary careers, and both went to Columbia for graduate school. Carl and his wife Irita, when they lived in Cornwall, first lived across from the North Cornwall Church, then called 3 Ways. That was the name of the house. Maybe some people still call it that. Barbara Clark, who I'm sure some of you remember, his daughter told me once that she remembered playing cards with bare feet with her sisters on the porch on a Sunday instead of attending services, and the ladies in town coming out of the church were not amused. Carl later moved his family to a house on Cream Hill, which was then the old Wickwire Farm. Some people still call it the Wickwire Farm. A few years later, he told his brother, my grandfather Mark, about a farm that was for sale in Cornwall Hollow. He and his wife, my grandmother Dorothy, bought that in 1923. Mark had a great reverence for his older brother Carl, who was 10 years older, and wrote a very short poem. I'm just going to read this before I read the passage from Carl. The poem is just simply titled Carl. Like a great tree spread over me, with love in every limb, I worshipped him. So now I'm going to read a passage about Cornwall from Carl's autobiography called 3 Worlds, which was published in 1936. I was married in August 1912 to Irita Bradford of Tallahassee, and I lived professorially near the Columbia campus in New York. For the summers, we discovered Cornwall, the greenest town in New England, near Litchfield, Connecticut. Since 1915, the town has become known for the writers who live there in the summer. Mark has a farm in Cornwall Hollow. Lewis Gannett, another on Cream Hill, and for several years, Joseph Wood Crouch had one near Cornwall Center. Henry Canby declared that when I was editing the Literary Guild and I read the book supplement of the Herald Tribune from Cream Hill, and he was editing the Saturday Review and the Book of the Month Club from Yelping Hill, and Mark was literary editor and Crouch dramatic critic of The Nation, that then Cornwall touched the literary taste of all America. What was more important, I thought, were that certain Cornwall sights and sounds, trees and flowers and animals, barnyards and tumbled houses, were being caught by some of Mark's poems in a crystal immortality. But in 1915, the town was a cool green wilderness. Most of the land was owned by families that had settled there 200 years before. The names on the tombstones were the same as those on the mailboxes. The town of Cornwall, they told me, had voted against ratifying the Constitution of the United States. Satisfied with their hills and forests, its people saw no need for being united with anything larger than Connecticut. They approved and accepted Hartford, where they had representatives in the legislature, and they accepted Yale. Some of the farms in Cornwall belonged to Yale College. But for the rest of the world, Cornwall had been and was as independent as hope when I lived there. The conservatism charmed me, perhaps because Cornwall was a kind of rural museum. There I saw my first scythe and cradle, as my grandfather had told me about them. I watched oxen at work, and again remembered my grandfather. There were no hard roads in the north part of Cornwall, and only one automobile. When we had to go further than we could comfortably walk, we drove horses. We bought a house, formerly the parsonage, which had no heat, but from one fireplace and no plumbing but a pump in the kitchen. The house sat in the shade like a hen hovering its chickens, in the shade of 8 elms. The lawn sloped velvet down to the ragged road, and across the road was the garden where I raised the vegetables we ate. A mile along the road was Cream Hill Lake, where we swam every afternoon. Riding, gardening, swimming made up my day. In the evening, we heard the frogs in the marsh and saw the fireflies over the meadow. On clear nights, the stars were silver splashes on the sky. Those stars I knew were elsewhere looking down on the brutal, valiant war. But here in Cornwall, there was no war. No war in 1915. Later, the war came even there, and young men went away. Summer visitors appeared, more and more of them. Asphalt ran up and down the hills and wound along the valleys. Visitors bought automobiles, and farmers bought them. Some of the farmers gave up half their summers to working for the visitors. But for the 8 years we lived at 3 Ways, the old parsonage, Cornwall was still a green hiding place. My daughters, Anne, born in 1915, Margaret in 1917, and Barbara in 1920, have never spent or wanted to spend a summer anywhere but there. Until Barbara was 3, she thought that Cornwall and country meant the same thing. And as soon as she got out of the city, pointed to the fields and said, "Cornwall." Thank you.
Major General John Sedgwick was born September 13th in Cornwall, Connecticut, and died May 9th in 1864 at age 50, and was buried in Cornwall Hollow. The letters I'm reading to you today come from a collection of letters written to his father and to his sister, and were published in the book Correspondence of Major General John Sedgwick. These letters span from 1846 to 1848, while Major General John Sedgwick was in his early 30s, fighting in the Mexican War. Off Tampico, Mexico, February 20th, 1847. My dear sister, I left the Brazos on the 17th in the steamship Massachusetts, having on board General Scott and staff numbering some 30 officers, some colonels, majors, captains, etc. With about 250 soldiers, we arrived at this place yesterday morning, making the passage in 3 days, 280 miles, having most of the time slight breeze and nose not favorable. Although this is a steamship, she does not use her steam excepting for in calm, where the wind is very light and ahead, but depends principally upon her sails, like an ordinary sailing vessel. Most of the time, we were in sight of the land, which presents, till within a few miles of Tampico, the same sandy, arid appearance that the whole coast does, from New Orleans to Brazos. For the first few miles, say 40, the shore presents a bold, rugged line, apparently rocky and covered with large timbers. Some of the mountains loom up as large as the Cornwall hills. I have not been ashore yet, consequently know nothing about Tampico, except from the reports, which speak very favorably of it. Plenty of all sorts of fruits, and of the finest kinds, oranges, figs, pomegranates, prunes, etc. And just now the climate is delightful. But the long summers and extreme heat are very debilitating, and require a northern winter to interrogate and strengthen a person, to enable him to commence again. General Scott and suite have gone to shore to hurry on matters there, and expect to leave in a day or two. But the great strike will not be made in a month or more, as everything moves very slowly. Vessels arrive very slowly, and troops still slower. And after all arrive, it will take a long time to organize so large a force, collecting from so many different places. There are about 3,000 already assembled, about 10,000 more expected, that are on the way from the Brazos, all to meet at an island about 60 miles below here, Lobos. From there we sail in company, in all 96 vessels, proceed a few miles below Veracruz, and effect a landing if possible. This I believe to be the intended expedition. Circumstances may change it. Nothing has been spared in perfecting it, and I ardently hope it may be a successful one. Yet, so many little things may change the operations that it may prove very hazardous. I long to see the end. On arriving here, we learned the death of a young officer of our regiment who died at this place on the 6th instant. He was a graduate of the 42nd and had been promoted but a few months. When his company left New York in September, he was dangerously ill. As they did not tell him till after the company had sailed, this had a great effect on him, and he insisted upon coming out long before his physician thought he was able. His death may be attributed to his zealous devotion to his duty. This is the first death in my regiment for 5 years, and the third natural one in this army since the arrival at Corpus Christi. 20 months since. I received but a few letters from home, and not more than twice for the last 4 months, and these are very old. I hope mine do not receive the same fate. I generally write about once a month home, and occasionally to Philo or Eliza, but if hereafter you do not receive them so often, do not be alarmed, as perhaps no opportunity for sending will occur. If I should be enabled to write, and you are indebted for this to a calm, which gives me a short interruption to my seasickness. I suffered very much for a few days before we sailed. We had a very heavy norther, which blew us out to sea and made sad havoc amongst the lovers. I had a letter some time since from Henry, offering his services in procuring promotions to any new regiment that may be raised, which I declined, merely because I thought they would be disbanded at the end of the war, and I might then want his service in maintaining my commission. His friend, Lieutenant Peck, is now on board with me, and we are talking of concocting a letter for Henry. Your affectionate brother, J.S. That was a letter to General John Sedgwick's sister, Emily. And this is a letter to his father. My dear father, yesterday we had the pleasure of receiving another mail from the States, and in it I found yours of January 1st, 13th, and 15th. Also one from Dr. Gold, for all of which I am very thankful. No mail has left here for more than a month, and all of our letters for that time have been collecting in the post office. Rumor says that the mail will leave here day after tomorrow. The first order issued after General Butler was assumed the command was the mail should leave on the 1st and the 15th of every month at each end of the line. This gives great satisfaction to all. General Scott had always sent and received all his letters by the English courier to the neglect of all the other officers. This has given great dissatisfaction. The road has been opened so that a small escort could easily pass through, and no good reason can be seen why we have not had mail in at least twice a month. General Scott will probably not leave this country for several months. The court before which he is to appear has not yet met, and it is likely it will be in session for some time. The difficulty between him and Gerald's Worth and Philo appears to have created a greater sensation in the States than here. No one here says or cares anything about it, unless it be about their personal friends. And as for the merits of the case, I know little, and care still less about it. I think it was bad policy to relieve General Scott at this time. It may have been a bad effect upon the treaty. The orders reached here the 22nd, and as we were celebrating the birthday of Washington, the Indians about the town flocked in, thinking it was a pronunciamiento by the soldiers in favor of General Scott. They cannot understand how the orders of the president can triumph over the military. When General Worth was arrested, they wanted to know if his troops would return to the States or join the Mexicans. It is reported that these armistices had been concluded, and the return of which is not known. This is supposed is preparatory to the ratification of the treaty at Washington, and the probability of its being ratified here. Of this, there is no certainty. It is doubtful whether the government is strong enough to carry it through. I believe the government and the best parts of the population are anxious for it, but the military, chieftains, and the rabble oppose it. The working classes are benefited by the war. The rabble take good care to save themselves when hard blows come. Someone said that we ought to continue the war and whip them till they consent to take back all Texas to the Sabine. It may come to that yet. Your affectionate son, J. Sedgwick.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. coming to celebrate Cornwall and the Cornwall Library. I'm going to read a piece by James Thurber. Thurber came here in the 40s, I believe, and he was apparently sort of nomadic, and he kept moving from town to town in Connecticut, looking for what he called the great good place. And apparently he found it in East Cornwall. And I'm a Scoville, so I've been coming here all my life, but for my family, Thurber was like the sun. I mean, we couldn't believe our good fortune that he lived in Cornwall, Connecticut. We didn't know him, but we worshipped him. So I'm not going to read about a Cornwall piece, a piece about Cornwall, but I'm going to read this famous piece called "The Night the Bed Fell," which was published in the New Yorker on June 30th, 1933. I suppose that the high water mark of my youth in Columbus, Ohio, was the night the bed fell on my father. It makes a better recitation than it does a piece of writing, for it is almost necessary to throw furniture around, shake doors, and bark like a dog, to lend the proper atmosphere and verisimilitude to what is admittedly a somewhat incredible tale. Still, it did take place. It happened then that my father had decided to sleep in the attic one night to be away where he could think. My mother opposed the notion strongly because, she said, the old wooden bed up there was unsafe. It was wobbly, and the heavy headboard would crash down on Father's head in case the bed fell and kill him. There was no dissuading him, however, and at 10:15, he closed the attic door behind him and went up the narrow, twisting stairs. We later heard ominous creakings as he crawled into bed. Grandfather, who usually slept in the attic bed when he was with us, had disappeared some days before. On these occasions, he was usually gone 6 or 8 days and returned growling and out of temper with the news that the Federal Union was run by a passel of blockheads and that the Army of the Potomac didn't have any more chance than a fiddler's bitch. We had visiting us at this time a nervous first cousin of mine named Briggs Beale, who believed that he was likely to cease breathing when he was asleep. It was his feeling that if he were not awakened every hour during the night, he might die of suffocation. He had been accustomed to setting an alarm clock to ring at intervals until morning, but I persuaded him to abandon this. He slept in my room, and I told him that I was such a light sleeper that if anyone quits breathing in the same room with me, I would wake instantly. He tested me the first night, which I had suspected he would, by holding his breath after my regular breathing had convinced him I was asleep. I was not asleep, however, and I called to him. This seemed to allay his fears a little, but he took the precaution of putting a glass of spirits of camphor on a little table at the head of his bed. In case I didn't arouse him until he was almost gone, he said he would sniff the camphor, a powerful reviver. Briggs was not the only member of his family who had his crotchets. Old Aunt Clarissa Beale, who could whistle like a man with 2 fingers in her mouth, suffered under the premonition that she was destined to die on South High Street because she had been born on South High Street and married on South High Street. And then there was Aunt Sarah Schoaf, who never went to bed at night without the fear that a burglar was going to get in and blow chloroform under her door through a tube. To avert this calamity, she was in greater dread of anesthetics than of losing her household goods. She always piled her money, silverware, and other valuables in a neat stack just outside her bedroom with a note reading, "This is all I have. Please take it and do not use your chloroform, as this is all I have." Aunt Gracie Schoaf also had a burglar phobia, but she met it with more fortitude. She was confident that burglars had been getting into her house every night for 40 years. The fact that she never missed anything was to her no proof to the contrary. She always claimed that she scared them off before they could take anything by throwing shoes down the hallway. When she went to bed, she piled, where she could get at them handily, all the shoes there were about her turned off the light, she would sit up in bed and say, "Hark!" Her husband, who had learned to ignore the whole situation as long ago as 1903, would either be sound asleep or pretend to be sound asleep. In either case, he would not respond to her tugging and pulling, so that presently she would arise, tiptoe to the door, open it slightly, and heave a shoe down the hall in one direction, and its mate down the hall in the other direction. Some nights she threw them all, some nights only a couple of pairs. But I am straying from the remarkable incidents that took place during the night that the bed fell on Father. By midnight, we were all in bed. The layout of the rooms and the disposition of their occupants is important to an understanding of what later occurred. In the front room upstairs, just under Father's attic bedroom, were my mother and my brother Herman, who sometimes sang in his sleep, usually marching through Georgia or onward Christian soldiers. Briggs Beale and myself were in a room adjoining this room. My brother Roy was in a room across the hall from ours. Our bull terrier, Rex, slept in the hall. My bed was an iron cot, one of those affairs which are made wide enough to sleep on comfortably only by putting up, flat with the middle section, the two sides which ordinarily hang down like the sideboards of a drop-leaf table. When these sides are up, it is perilous to roll too far toward the edge, for then the cot is liable to tip completely over, bringing the whole bed down on top of one with a tremendous banging crash. This, in fact, is precisely what happened about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was my mother who, in recalling the scene later, first referred to it as the night the bed fell on your father. Always a deep sleeper, slow to arouse, I had lied to Briggs. I was at first unconscious of what had happened when the iron cot rolled me onto the floor and toppled over on me. It left me still warmly bundled up and unhurt, for the bed rested above me like a canopy. Hence I did not wake up, only reached the edge of consciousness and went back. The racket, however, instantly awakened my mother in the next room, who came to the immediate conclusion that her worst dread was realized. The big wooden bed upstairs had fallen on Father. She therefore screamed, "Let's go to your poor father!" It was this shout, rather than the noise of my cot falling, that awakened my brother Herman in the same room with her. He thought that Mother had become, for no apparent reason, hysterical. "You're all right, Mama!" he shouted, trying to calm her. They exchanged shout for 10 seconds. "Let's go to your poor father!" and "You're all right!" That woke up Briggs. By this time I was conscious of what was going on in a vague way, but did not yet realize that I was under my bed instead of in it. Briggs, awakening in the midst of loud shouts of fear and apprehension, came to the quick conclusion that he was suffocating and that we were all trying to bring him out. With a low moan, he grasped the glass of camphor at the head of his bed and instead of sniffing it, poured it over himself. The room reeked of camphor. "Oh! Oh!" choked Briggs like a drowning man, for he had almost succeeded in stopping his breathing under the deluge of pungent spirits. He leaped out of bed and groped toward the open window, but he came against one that was closed. With what in his hand, he beat out the glass, and I could hear it crash and tinkle in the alleyway below. It was at this juncture that I, in trying to get up, had the uncanny sensation of feeling my bed above me. Foggy with sleep, I now suspected in my turn that the whole uproar was being made in a frantic endeavor to extricate me from what must be an unheard of and perilous situation. "Get me out of this!" I called. "Get me out!" I think I had the nightmarish belief that I was entombed in a mine. "Run!" gasped Briggs, floundering in his camphor. By this time, my mother, still shouting, pursued by Herman, also still shouting, was trying to open the door to the attic in order to go up and get my father's body out of the wreckage. The door was stuck, however, and wouldn't yield. Her frantic pulls on it only added to the general banging and confusion. Roy and the dog were now up, the one shouting questions, the other barking. "Arr, arr!" Farther dozed away, and soundest sleeper of all, had by this time been awakened by the battering on the attic door. He decided that the house was on fire. I'm coming, he wailed in a slow, sleepy voice. It took him many minutes to regain full consciousness. My mother, still believing that he was caught under the bed, detected in his "I'm coming" the mournful, resigned note of one who is preparing to meet his maker. "He's dying," she shouted. "I'm all right," Briggs yelled to reassure her. "I'm all right." He still believed that it was his own closeness to death that was worrying Mother. I found at last the light switch in my room, unlocked the door, and Briggs and I joined the others at the attic door. The dog, who never did like Briggs, jumped for him, assuming that he was the culprit in whatever was going on, and Roy had to throw Rex and hold him. We could hear Father crawling out of the bed upstairs. Roy pulled the attic door open with a mighty jerk, and Father came down the stairs, sleepy and irritable, but safe and sound. My mother began to weep when she saw him. Rex began to howl. "No!" "What in the name of God is going on here?" asked my father. The situation was finally put together like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. Father caught a cold from prowling around in his bare feet, but there were no other bad results. "I'm glad," said Mother, who always looked on the bright side of things, "that your grandfather wasn't here." Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for an excellent selection of readings, all beautifully read. I hope you're going to join us over in the library now for the celebration. Thank you again.